That CPD Show. Welcome back to That CPD Show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host for today. And today my guest is Heather Robertson. Heather, along with her husband David, are the pastors of Harvest Church in Hamilton. Heather and David met in Bible college and have been in ministry for almost 40 years and then felt the call of God to Scotland 3 years ago. Heather is also the head coach for AOG GB's Ministers in Training Programme, cohort 27. Heather has 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Heather, welcome to the pod. Welcome. It's great to have you on.
Hey, Chris, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Yes, well, you are very, very welcome. And I'm excited to talk with you about some development resources today. But firstly, tell me about how things are going in Scotland. You know, as I just said in the intro, you've been there for 3 years. How's life up north of the border? How are you finding it? How's the church?
Life in Scotland is absolutely wonderful. I think we moved up here at the end of COVID, so that was an interesting experience. Absolutely loving being at the church that was planted 22 years ago. We've moved into our own building. We've just seen there's amazing things happening in Scotland. It just seems like every Sunday people are rocking up who, you know, just want to know Jesus. So the church has doubled in the last year, and we're just about to plant another church. So it's exciting, and we're glad we came.
That is really, really exciting. Fantastic news, and great to hear all that God's doing in your church. Well, we're here to talk about development today, and you've got 3 development resources with you. But first, of course, we are here to also talk about dessert, because it's very important that we talk about dessert, I always think, and always a good accompaniment with any development resources, maybe to have a dessert with you. So, Heather, would you talk to me about what is the dessert that you brought with you, your favourite dessert?
Okay, so because we're in Scotland, I now have a new favourite, and the favourite is Cranachan. And you may not know what Cranachan is, but it involves delicious Scottish raspberries, lots of cream. You can put flavouring in it. I think traditionally it was whiskey, but if that's not your bag, that's fine. And then it's got a kind of oaty, crunchy thing in it, which is a little bit like granola, but it's kind of layered, and it's absolutely yummy. So that's my favourite at the moment.
Oh, it does sound very good. I've never had Cranachan before. In fact, I don't think I've even really heard of it. For some reason, it's one of those things where, you know, I live obviously south of the border. My accent probably gives that one away. But it's never one I've even seen on a menu at a restaurant or anything like that. So it seems like it's got that kind of combination between fruitiness, crunchiness, all those kind of things. Yeah, talk to me about it. Why do you love it so much?
Well, there's just the combination of the flavours. It is true, the crunchiness, but there's nothing like a Scottish raspberry, I reckon. They're just
really
better. I think they're the most supreme fruit, certainly in Scotland. I think it's Cranachan is something maybe traditionally it would be on a menu, particularly for New Year's Eve. So I would tend to kind of associate it with like a New Year's Eve party or whatever. Anyway, so the Good Food website has a great recipe for Cranachan if you fancy it. So give it a go.
Very good. Okay, well, recommended. That sounds excellent. I'm going to have to try that. And I think for New Year's Eve as well, having a New Year's Eve dessert, it's one of those things where you don't have a lot of. I don't think New Year's Eve doesn't have a lot of tradition often to it, but to have something that maybe is specific for New Year's Eve in terms of what's on the menu, I think it's a great idea. So brilliant.
Up here, there's plenty of tradition around New Year. In fact, I think New Year's Eve is probably bigger than Christmas for lots of historic reasons that we won't go into now. But yeah, there you go.
Fantastic. Okie dokie. All right. Well, we're going to go into 3 resources now, but we'll go one by one. Let's talk about your first resource. What's the first one that you've brought with you today?
Yes. So my first resource is called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth, Hailey, Barton. Now, she's a Doctor of Divinity who runs something called the Transforming Centre, which is focused on encouraging leaders with developing the health of their own souls. So this is a book that I picked up probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's one of those that I've gone back to. The kind of strapline for the book is Seeking God in the Crucible of Ministry, and she kind of, in the opener, she bases the book on Matthew 16:26, which says, And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? As soon as I read that, I just thought, that's it. Because it's just, don't you think it's so easy to run hard in ministry, but to stay well, you absolutely have to sit with God and listen to what's going on in your own soul. I love the stretch of ministry, but I'm also conscious that, it's often when things are going well and we're running hard and we're developing things, that then it's easy to kind of lose touch with what we're thinking and feeling on the inside because we're running so hard. So I love this book because it addresses a lot of that and kind of encourages you to kind of dial down and to hear, to listen what's really going on, in your own mind and heart before God.
It sounds really interesting. I know that a couple of the guests previously we've had similar, I think, Ruth Hailey Barton books before. It might have been the same one. I can't quite remember.
Okay.
But I know it's certainly a very popular book. Talk to me more about maybe some of the impact that it has on you. How has it changed how you go about ministry, or maybe there's some practices that you put into place because of it?
For sure. So I think, some of the content is things like, the practice of paying attention, living within your limits, what's the call about, and all of that kind of thing. But I think there have been 2 points particularly where the practice. So the idea is there's a chapter and then there's a practice where she encourages you to kind of work through a listening exercise. So how this has impacted me. So in probably when I first picked the book up, I realized that very thing, that there was a really good kind of stretch on ministry, and that there were things that I did need to listen to about my own soul, which really helped. Now, at that time, there was a little bit of a health crisis going on for me as well. Now, when we moved to Scotland, I moved from being a full-time pastor to being part-time. Some of that was to allow for some recovery time. But what I realized was the importance of listening to my own soul in that season, because there was a sense in which I'd always been full-time in ministry. And so I was having guilty feelings, for example, about not answering my email and those kind of things, where you realize that actually ministry is 24/7 up here, isn't it? And it just kind of really helped me to recognize that, first and foremost, God loves me as an individual, loves you as an individual, before the ministry, before the work that I'm going to do, before the exploits I'm going to do for him. So that really helped me to dial down and to practice dialing down and to really taking note before God of what is really going on in my, right at the core of my being. So I would say that's the way that it helps. And from time to time, I find myself kind of picking it up. Also in that season, there's a great chapter about call. And I just needed time to re-examine what my call was in this particular season. And, it was a great reminder to me that, there's a primary call to be a lover of Jesus and a follower of Jesus, before the call to ministry, and kind of part and parcel of that, is a calling as a wife and a mother and a great friend and all of those kind of things. So that particular season just helped me to rethink, okay, well, what is the call of my life, and to keep the primary call the primary thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it really resonates with me. What you said there is, when we think about ministry, we often think about, the stuff that we do at church, that's ministry. And of course it is. Yeah. But there's so much more. The first and foremost, we're a minister to the Lord. And yes, that's not the stuff we do in church. And no, that's part of it, of course. But it's first off as followers of Christ, isn't it? And it's that. And it's that, and then we have the calling of ministry to our families, and that is as much a call of ministry. Now, it's not in a church context, but obviously it's all kind of meshes together. But I think sometimes it's very interesting. We kind of separate those things, and it can then mean that we work so hard in one area, which could be our our life in the church on Sundays, all those kind of things, and we can forget that actually first and foremost we're ministers to the Lord, and that means to spend time in His presence, to love Him, to learn from Him, and then also to work that out in the lives of our family as well. So I think it really resonates with me, and I think for church leaders and ministers listening to this, that I think that'll be a challenge for them. What are some things that you think that they could do, or maybe there are things in this book that can help them get that kind of that right order in place, so that they're thinking not about it's not just always about work, but it's about how to have a more sort of holistic ministry life. Are there any things that you'd recommend from that?
Yeah, I think in ministry there are daily rhythms and there are seasonal rhythms that if we pay attention to, they make the world a difference. So I can think of times in ministry where it's almost like the life on the stage has become dominant, and what's in behind it, actually, who I am as a person before God is what that stands on, not the other way around. I can't lose touch of that. So absolutely, daily rhythms, sitting with God with your Bible, but also seeking to listen to Him, but also to acknowledge what you're feeling, what you're thinking today, and bring that before God. Am I feeling angry about something? Why have I got so stressed about that thing that seems so small? Those kind of things, which are about daily rhythms. I would also say I like the idea of the rhythm of 7. So the idea that 1 in 7, Sabbath rest, the command of that, which obviously comes out in the book. But also, over the years, we've liked to think of 1 week in 7. Now, it might not be as religious as 1 week in 7, but that there are definite, 1 week in 7, there would be a day where you get away, or a couple of days where you get away with your Bible, with anything that you just sense that you want to take with you, that would be about feeding your own soul, that would be about looking after your own soul. And you do that so that what you bring to ministry is your real self, and not some kind of persona that you want other people to recognize. There's a great little quote in the book. Am I right to read this?
Of course, yeah.
Because the book is absolutely rich. She's obviously very well read, and the book is absolutely rich with obviously other sources. But this quote in particular that I just thought would be good to pull out is from a book called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. And in the book it says, vocation does not come from willfulness. It comes from listening. I must listen to my life and try to understand what it is truly about, or my life will never represent anything real in the world, no matter how earnest my intentions. So I would say at core, I guess the biggest lesson for me from the reading was, I want to keep it real. I want to keep it real, and I want God to show me what isn't real, about what I'm doing and how I'm living, so that I continue to be a great learner, a great disciple of His first and foremost.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Well, that's Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Hailey Barton. Let's move on to the second resource that you brought with you. What's that second one?
Okay, so I don't want to freak you out, but I brought a manual with me, and there's a bit of a story behind this manual, because I bought it on the back of a conference that I went to that just seemed absolutely apt in the season that I was in, that's continued to inform ministry. So the book is called Planning Small Groups with Purpose by Steve Gladen of Saddleback. Now, okay, small groups. Don't let that turn you off if you don't think particularly that you're a small groups person, but just the principle of how we help people become great disciples, how we see life transformation by the work of God's Spirit and His Word, how we do that, and how we do it well in community. When I was in early ministry, we were at a church in Yorkshire at the time, and we saw incredible things happen. There were lots of new people coming in. It was a small church, but growing crazily. And somehow in my wisdom, I thought the thing to do was to go around and try and like visit every one of these new people and try and personally disciple every single one of them. And then I read Exodus 18, you know, where Jethro gives Moses a right telling off, doesn't he? And says, what you're doing isn't right, you know, because here's Moses trying to look after a nation of 1 million people and, you know, follow, you know, carry all the judgments himself. And as I read that, you know, Jethro says, break it down into tens, fifties, hundreds, thousands. And I just remember reading that and thinking, how brilliant that he would break the large right down into the small, right down into little family units. And at that stage, I thought, okay. So David and I went on a journey of thinking, we always want to be in a church where people have got some sense of like small tribe to belong to, where they're really known and where they can really grow and be really accountable, and so that the church can continue to grow large. So I picked up this book, Planning Small Groups with Purpose. Is this too much information?
Absolutely not. This is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I picked this book up, Planning Small Groups with Purpose, on the back of a conference I've been to, because at the time we were at Kingsgate in Peterborough, and I was responsible for small groups and pastoral. And at that time, we probably had about 1,000 people in small groups, and we were at a strategic planning day. And at this planning day, somebody had stirred in us the thought, how would things look differently in your area of responsibility if you were to take your current church stats and multiply them by 10? And what that did, that little exercise, was it pushed all of us to think, and pushed me to think, okay, well, what does God on the move? What does revival really look like? And how could we make sure that people can grow their discipleship, you know, in that context? So I went looking for a resource. So if you're doing that, often you kind of look beyond where you are, don't you? So I ended up at this Saddleback conference online and picked up this book. So it's a manual, but as always with you know, with resources from Saddleback, they kind of go along the line of, here's the compelling why, here's why we're doing what we're doing, and then kind of breaks it down. So I went on a journey with my team, and I just really think it helped to bring some fresh thoughts about how we disciple people within the community of God. You know, it's one thing, isn't it, to say, well, it's all about relationships, but actually people come in and they don't have relationships. So how are we going to help people connect and form and be encouraged? So this book has kind of really helped me in ministry to continue to think about those things like, you know, how do you keep a low bar on leadership? How do you help people find their kind of leadership level in terms of developing their gifts and their skills and that kind of thing? And then simply how people connect, you know, meaningfully in relationships so that they grow together. So that was long story short on why this manual, why I've ended up recommending a manual, really.
Yeah, and I think that from every minister listening to this, figuring out small groups is one of the hardest things to do. I don't think I've ever met a church that has found it really, really easy. And I think for Saddleback, I know that they're very, very famous for having, you know, over 100% of their church attend small groups. So it's only 120, 125% are attending. So we've got people who don't go on the Sunday are attending small groups. What are some of the keys that they give? And it doesn't, maybe they could be practical ones, they could be more philosophical ones, but what are some of those keys that that this book kind of draws out that could be helpful for ministers listening and thinking about small groups?
Yes. So I think it helps with the kind of structure of small group, you know, almost like a kind of support structure. But I think here's a few little nuggets. Here's one. People come for content and stay for connection. So to have maybe a campaign season where we tend to connect our Sunday teaching with what happens in small groups, but from time to time, we would maybe have a season where we're maybe looking at a particular theme, like a course that's been especially written, maybe with little podcasts in it or whatever, that kind of thing. So they would say, have a campaign season. That sounds a bit, a bit corporate, doesn't it? But have a season where you're thinking, oh, okay, well, we're going to encourage as many people as possible to engage, and all you're asking them to do is engage for the length of the season. So it might be 6 weeks in a small group or 8 weeks, and give it a try and see where it goes. So we ran a wellbeing series that worked really well for us at the beginning of the year. I've done that before at Kingsgate, but just think through, okay, well, what is it that we just know that people would love to hear about and would love to grow in and would love to engage in, where basically people then would find a little community and most of them would tend to stay. So yeah, come for content, stay for connection, have a campaign season. That would be one thing. The other thing is about the leadership bar. I think that often, in church life, particularly if there's been a Bible study type model, then maybe the kind of people that we're looking for are maybe people who, have been reading God's word for 50 years and are so, know every fine detail about it. And then we come unstuck, because if those people are leading, other people think, well, I'm not going to have that knowledge for another 50 years. How am I going to get into things? So to low bar it as much as possible. And I think when we low bar things, we have to ensure that there's great support. I think that's the key. So if leaders have, they have a go-to person, they have somebody that's like overseeing them, checking in on them, how's your group going? Can I pop in? That kind of thing, just to help them along. But to encourage those people then to be facilitators. Anyway, that was kind of more about, there's something about lowering the bar of your leadership that actually makes it possible to get more people involved. I mean, I think at Saddleback, people that might have been Christians 6 weeks, because of the nature of the material and the support, they're able to kind of get in on things really early doors. I don't think we've ever done it quite that early. But hey, we have to think about these things, don't we? Because come revival, we're going to have to release people really quickly to be able to lead quickly in a supported way. So those would be a couple of things.
No, I think they're really interesting things to think through. I think as a minister, thinking about small groups, and actually I was thinking about my own church's journey with small groups. We've just gone through a whole restructure of it, and some of these principles actually really did apply and really works, especially around purpose. I think that was been really key. And it's talking about planning small groups with purpose. What I found is that people gather around purpose more than just come and hang out. It's not that people want a sense of purpose of why they're coming to a group. So we found that having groups around, like you said, like kind of small short courses have worked really, really well, especially and in our church, and it may be different for every other church, but theology ones have really taken off. There's a sort of real hunger within the church to grow theologically at the moment. And what's great is by setting some of these up, you can actually see where people are really looking to grow in, so they can have, and you can find incredible content online. You don't have to go and write courses all yourself. But what it does, it provides that moment where people that, you've suddenly got, well, I'm interested in that and you're interested in that. And suddenly that's the seedbed for connection. And that's what you want. Like you said, they come for the content, but they stay for the community. And so I think there's some really great things, and thinking like what this book seems to imply is that purpose is the key thing, that you want to plan it with purpose, but plan purpose into your groups because people really do gather around purpose. How has it affected in your church? What you talked about doing a sort of a well-being group. Are there other bits and pieces that you've taken from this book that you put into practice that you've really seen fruit from?
Yeah, sure. So when we moved here, there were probably 4 or 5 groups that were kind of all doing their own thing a little bit. But what it's helped us to do is I'm sure lots of churches would be the same, that you kind of have a planned teaching program for a Sunday where you thought about, okay, well, where are we touching on doctrine? Where are we touching on growing in prayer and those kind of things that are about culture and our belief system. And so we decided that our life groups then would kind of buy into that. So life groups are much more about like, how do I live differently because of what I heard on Sunday, as much as anything, rather than we're going to kind of dig into the finer details of Romans or something like that. So that piece, notes get written on a Sunday, that's kind of gets fed in. But now we've got about 14 groups, but those groups now each have their own, we're just moving into a season where each of them have got their own coach. People who are supported just thrive, don't they, hey? The other thing is we did need to think about, okay, well, people coming out of Alpha, so people who are brand new to faith, they're just coming out of Alpha, how do we help them? So we have something called a grow group, which is kind of easy end content. So I think for us, it's been thinking maybe not one type of group, but where do people connect together in order that spiritual formation can happen? So for us, really, we're just on that journey, but needing to be on the journey because we've probably seen a lot. I mean, Sunday by Sunday, 2 or 3 people coming to faith. So you have to kind of get that discipleship track going, don't you? So the book has certainly helped us with kind of thinking through, okay, well, how do people grow in God, from new babies to people who've, I've got a group of octogenarians on a Wednesday afternoon, and I love it. But they're still thirsty and hungry for the things of God. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that is Planning Small Groups with Purpose by Steve Gladen. Shall we move on to your final resource? What's the final resource that you brought with you today?
Sure. So this is the series, a podcast series by the late Dr. Michael Mosley called Just One Thing. I'm sure on the back of COVID, lots of us kind of got really interested in mental health. And so much of this stuff, the idea of the podcast is that it's only 15-20 minutes each one, but he represents an idea where if you took this on, your life could be better, usually around mental, emotional or physical well-being. And then what he does is he gets a specialist in and gives a compelling reason why this is a good thing, and then gets someone to road test it. It gives them a week, and then at the end of the week he says kind of how you're doing. So he covers things like sleep and drinking water and exercise and all of those kind of things. But it's a really smart series actually, that you can continue to just access. I often listen to it in the car, because it's a kind of great little kind of snippet, how eating nuts helps you with your life. I think for me, I remember in the early days of ministry, being at a demanding church with 3 little children, and getting to the point where I was wondering, why am I feeling so tired all the time? And I remember during that season, thinking, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling so tired? And thinking, if only I pray more, it'll sort it out. But obviously prayer is obviously part of that. But what I realized was, like Elijah, I probably needed a good night's sleep, and I needed to, eat decent meals regularly rather than skip them. And I needed maybe some time away and that kind of thing to replenish. And so since then, I've always kind of had an interest in our well-being, and those things that kind of contribute to that. So that's my interest really in the series, and there's been lots to gain from it.
Fantastic. I think I've listened to 1 or 2 episodes of this podcast. Really, really fascinating, interesting insights. What are some of the are there some that really have stuck in your mind that have really kind of changed your habits around something? So maybe it is around sleep or hydration or something like that. Which ones have been really stand out for you?
Sure. So there was one which was actually, it was a special. It was an hour long. It was called an inflammation special, which doesn't sound very very catchy, but it was absolutely fascinating, because the professor that was on it, that he was interviewing, was talking about the effect of diets on our T cells, and how our body, through eating certain foods, kind of gets rid of some of the junk. Part of that, they mentioned, was fasting. Now, what I love about the series is that there's so many things that we within the household of faith would know about and would have endorsed for a lot of years, but how, like, some of the scientists are saying, oh yeah, this is really good for you. And we're going, yeah. So there was something in there about, you know, the benefits of intermittent fasting and that kind of thing. That was great. There was one on, so that has certainly changed. So we've absolutely cut down on the number of carbs that we're eating, because we're probably, in terms of a healthy plate, too many carbs, which obviously turn to sugar, that kind of thing. And cutting down sugar has certainly helped us with sleep. So that's been one of the changes. The other thing is about exercise. So I do go to the gym, but one of the programs was about moving your body on the hour, every hour. So kind of set a timer, get up and move around. And the person that had kind of done the study on this particular thing said that, you know, if you go and hard drive it at the gym once a week, and then spend the rest of the time on a sofa, actually that isn't anywhere near as good for you as if you get up and move around on the hour. So set a timer on my phone and just get up and, you know, like wander around, you know, head down the stairs or go for a coffee or whatever it takes, just so that our bodies are moving, which just kind of really helps with that kind of, you know, muscles and all of that. Core strength in muscles was another one, you know, as we get older, which, you know, I'm in that bracket, you know, retaining your core strength, your muscle strength, is also important. So, you know, that's been part of my kind of gym routine in sort of trying to increase muscle strength. So those have been some of the take homes. Some other random things. So, for example, there's been a study done on brushing your teeth. There's a whole one on brushing your teeth. And apparently gum health is critical to how we restore when we're sick in other areas. So there's a study done during COVID where people that were in high dependency units recovered better if they'd got good gum health, as in they were in the practice of brushing their teeth regularly, than people that didn't. So there we go. So lots of interesting little insights there.
That is interesting. I've actually heard of I'm a football fan. In football now, they have people that have found that they can solve issues with footballers, you know, legs and Achilles and things like that by removing some teeth. But sometimes they've linked everything up. That the root cause was there's a tooth in the wrong place. Remove the tooth, and because of, you know, it's all connected. This is connected, yes. And I just couldn't believe it when I read it. You know, it just seems absolutely ridiculous. But it's, you know, it helps these footballers to be able to get injured less and all those kind of things. So you just never know sometimes. And I think sometimes these little small habits are really good. And I mean, I'm not suggesting people should be getting their teeth removed at all. But I think what this podcast does is it's trying to introduce a small habit that you can put in place that will do. I mean, and I would say I'm very much on that same journey of looking at what habits can I put in place to make sure that I'm able to do and live the life that God needs me to do. So that includes trying to get better with my nutrition. So like you said, less of the junk food, and, you know, eating more protein and all those kind of things. And you know, so like going to the gym, you know, all those things, you know, just things you don't think about. And then what you don't want to do is get, you know, I don't want to reach later in my life and realize I can't stand up properly or walk around. And actually the best place to start is to start now. So I think that's a really good encouragement for any minister. And it's something with the CPD platform that we have, is that we want development to not just be knowledge that's through, it doesn't have to just be through books. So you can set a 3-month health goal, for instance. So it could be starting to go to the gym, because that's development, because actually it's going to make an impact on your life and your ministry, particularly if you are fitter and healthier and you're eating better, then you're going to be able to have more energy. If you're sleeping better, it's going to give you more energy. You can then be more present in how you're being able to, you know, help people or you know, minister on a Sunday, all those kind of things. And it has this huge knock-on effect. So so I think this podcast is a brilliant a podcast to really help people think about habits and to put it in slowly, because it is just one thing, isn't it? You know, it's not try and do a million things at one time. Just do one thing. What's a new habit that you can put in place?
Give it a go.
Really help.
I love what you're saying, Chris, because I think longevity in ministry is about lots of different things, but looking after ourselves, if we're good and healthy, then, then we're going to be able to carry, the weight of whatever God gives us, and pray God, if we're faithful in small things, then, God does give us more, doesn't he? So I want to finish my race well, at the end of my life, but I also want to finish my ministry race well when it comes to retirement too. So I think that's partly why I'm interested in that. There's a great book I wanted to recommend, actually, if this is okay. I quite like sciencey books, but I read a really good book that I found actually in Sainsbury's, believe it or not, called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's a sciencey book, the science of sleep, but it's superb. It's things like, you may be lacking magnesium in your diet, for example, and that might be why you're not sleeping well, that kind of stuff. So if you like a sciencey book, it's a good one. Anyway.
Yes, he's got a great podcast as well. I think it's just called the Matthew Walker podcast. I went through a series, went through a time about 18 months ago of insomnia, and it was a very tough time in my life. But I learned an awful lot about how to sleep better, and thankfully come through that, which has been by God's grace in that, and which has been great. But learned an awful lot of things through it, and so Matthew Walker was really, really helpful in that season to just help me put some good practices and good things in place. Things like taking magnesium is certainly one of them that could just really helped with my sleep. So yes, brilliant. Let me just, my camera's just gone off. I will keep that going. Okay. Brilliant. Heather, thank you so much for joining me today. Those are 3 excellent resources. That is Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership by Ruth Hailey Barton, Planning Small Groups with Purpose by Steve Gladen, and lastly, Just One Thing by the late, great Dr. Michael Mosley. Thank you for joining me today. It's been great. Really enjoyed talking through all 3 of those things. And of course, being introduced to Cranachan as well.
Yes.
Did I pronounce it right? Cranachan?
Cranachan, yes. Beautiful.
Cranachan.
You sound almost Scottish there, Chris. So that's great.
That's never been said of me before, but I'll take that. So brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me. I will catch you again soon.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.